The lie I told myself was that it was for my career. In Los Angeles, your car isn't just how you get through the snarled traffic of the 405. It's your business card. It's the first impression you make. I was a commercial real estate broker, a shark in a sea of sharks, and I was doing well. I had closed a few big deals, my commission checks were healthy, and I was building a reputation. But I felt like I was perpetually stuck in the minor leagues. The guys who were closing the multi-million-dollar deals, the ones who commanded a room just by walking into it, they all drove German. Not just any German cars, but the big, intimidating ones. The ones that looked like they could annex a small country. My car was a perfectly respectable, fully loaded Acura. It was reliable, comfortable, and completely invisible. It was the car of a successful manager, not a future partner. I began to harbor a dangerous idea, that the distance between my current success and the stratosphere of wealth I craved was the exact length of a Mercedes-Benz GLE coupe. It was an obsession that started online late at night when my wife was asleep. I'd configure the car, a rolling sculpture of obsidian black metal and saddle brown leather. The AMG line exterior, the panoramic roof, the Burmester sound system. I knew every option, every package. It was a Predator, sleek and muscular, and I convinced myself that possessing it would somehow transfer its predatory instincts to me. It wasn't just a car. It was a power move, an essential piece of business equipment. It was an investment in my personal brand. I told myself this over and over until the lie started to feel like a sophisticated financial strategy. The price tag was just shy of $90,000. After my trade-in, I was looking at a loan that would generate a monthly payment of just over $1,600. $1,600 a month for a machine that would spend most of its life parked. It was a number so large it felt unreal. My wife, who worked as a teacher and was the pragmatic anchor of our lives, would have vetoed it instantly. Our financial plan, which she meticulously managed, was based on steady, sensible growth. We were aggressively paying down our mortgage on our small bungalow in the valley, building our investment portfolio, and saving for our son's future. There was no line item in her budget for ego-fueled German SUV. So I engineered a campaign of persuasion built on half-truths and optimistic projections. I had just closed a significant deal, and I presented the commission check as the new standard, not the exception. I talked about a huge deal I was on the verge of closing, a deal that was, in reality, a long shot at best. I framed the car as a client relations tool. "You have to look the part," I'd say, parroting a line I heard from a senior partner. "When I pull up to show a property in this thing, it tells the client I'm successful. It builds trust." It was nonsense, of course. Trust is built on competence and integrity, not on the badge on your grill. But I was the master of selling, and my most important client was my own wife. The final piece of my argument was the most deceptive. I showed her the payment, but I contextualized it with my fictionalized future income. "Look, once the big deal closes, this payment will be a fraction of my monthly take-home," I argued. "It's a short-term stretch for a long-term gain. It's a calculated risk." She was deeply skeptical. She saw the number, $1,600, and her teacher's salary brain immediately calculated what that money could be instead. A year of our son's preschool, a massive boost to our retirement fund, the kitchen renovation she'd been dreaming of. "It's so much," she'd say, her voice tight with anxiety. "What if the deal falls through? We have no room for error in our budget with a payment like that." I assured her it was a sure thing. I promised her she wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I wore her down with my confidence, my ambition, and ultimately my selfishness. She finally, reluctantly agreed, but the look in her eyes wasn't one of excitement. It was a look of profound unease, a silent prayer that the man she trusted knew what he was doing. He didn't. The day I went to the dealership was a coronation. I walked in not as a customer, but as a conqueror claiming his prize. The test drive was a formality. The moment I sank into the plush leather and gripped the thick steering wheel, it was over. The silent, insulated cabin made the chaos of LA traffic feel like a distant movie. The effortless power of the engine was intoxicating. This wasn't a car, it was a sanctuary. It was a clear and tangible signal that I was separate from the masses, that I was on a different level. In the finance office, I signed the stack of papers with a hand that didn't tremble. 72 months. $1,600 a month. The total cost with interest would be enough to buy a small condo in many parts of the country. But I didn't see the debt. I saw the keys nestled in a polished wooden box that the salesman slid across the desk. I drove it home, the setting sun glinting off the three-pointed star on the hood. I felt invincible. I had manifested my own success. When I pulled into our driveway, the car looked absurdly large, like a spaceship that had landed next to our humble bungalow. My wife came out, our young son on her hip. She tried to smile, to share in my triumph. But as she ran her hand over the gleaming black paint, I saw her touch was hesitant, as if she were afraid this beautiful, expensive thing might bite. I didn't see it then, but she was right to be afraid. We had just welcomed a Trojan horse into our lives, a gleaming symbol of success that was hiding an army of debt, stress, and resentment, ready to pour out and lay siege to everything we had built. The first month was a performance. I drove the car to work with a sense of theatrical purpose, making sure to park it where the senior partners would see. I offered to drive clients to lunch at every opportunity. The car was my wingman, my silent, powerful partner, and I felt its presence elevating my own. The initial feedback was exactly what I'd hoped for. Colleagues were impressed. Clients made comments. I felt like I had finally cracked the code, that I had bought my ticket into the inner circle. The first payment of $1,612 was withdrawn from our joint account on the 15th of the month. Seeing that chunk of money vanish in an instant was a jolt, a splash of cold water on my euphoric fantasy. It was an abstract number in a finance office, but it was a very real void in our bank account. That evening, I saw my wife at the kitchen table with her laptop, her face etched with worry. She was reworking our entire family budget, a complex spreadsheet of income and expenses that she had always managed with a calm, reassuring competence. Now she looked like a general trying to triage a battlefield casualty. "We have to make some cuts," she said, her voice strained. The cuts came swiftly and silently. Our weekly date night became a monthly, then a whenever-we-can event. The organic, farmers market groceries she loved were replaced by the generic brands from the budget supermarket. We canceled our cable subscription and a few streaming services. The small joys, the little pockets of comfort in our hectic lives, were the first to go, sacrificed at the altar of the beast in our garage. Then came the expenses I hadn't fully factored into my grand vision. The insurance premium was nearly 3 times what we'd paid for the Acura. A single tank of premium gas was over $100, and with my LA commute, I was filling it up weekly. I got a small scratch on the bumper in a tight parking garage, and the quote to repair it properly was over $2,000. I ended up just living with the scratch, a constant, ugly reminder of the car's fragility and my own. The pressure to justify the car's existence began to infect my work. The massive, sure-thing deal I had used to sell the idea to my wife was stalling. The clients were dragging their feet. Instead of feeling confident and powerful, I felt a gnawing desperation. Every phone call, every meeting was freighted with the weight of that car payment. I needed to close deals, not just to advance my career, but to simply keep my head above water. My colleagues sensed the shift. My easy confidence was replaced by a tense, aggressive energy. I started to make small, sloppy mistakes, my mind constantly preoccupied with the financial hole I was digging. The car that was meant to be the key to my success was actively sabotaging it. Our home, once a refuge, became a silent battleground. Every financial decision was fraught with tension. When our son needed a new pair of sneakers, it prompted a tense discussion about wants versus needs. The kitchen renovation my wife had dreamed of was now a bitter joke. The car was sucking up all the resources, all the oxygen for any other dream we might have had. One night, my wife broke down. "I feel like I'm suffocating," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "All we talk about is money, or rather, all we don't talk about is the money going to your car. It's this giant black hole in the middle of our lives, and it's pulling everything in. I'm working so hard, and for what? To pay for a car we can't afford and don't need." I felt a surge of defensive anger. Her tears felt like an accusation, a judgment on my ambition. "You don't get it," I argued, my voice rising. "This is what it takes. It's a temporary sacrifice. You have to have faith in me." But my words rang hollow, even to my own ears. What had started as a calculated risk was now clearly a reckless gamble, and we were both losing. The trust between us, the easy partnership that had been the foundation of our marriage, was beginning to erode. The car wasn't just a financial burden, it was an emotional one. It was a symbol not of my success, but of my selfishness. I would sit in it in the garage sometimes, in the dark, surrounded by the soft glow of the ambient lighting and the smell of expensive leather. I would try to recapture that initial feeling of power and invincibility. But all I could feel was the crushing weight of that $1,600 payment, a monthly reminder of the beautiful, terrible mistake I had made. The tipping point wasn't a sudden explosion, but a series of blows that systematically shattered our already fragile financial foundation. First, the big real estate deal, the one I had pinned all my hopes on, the one that was my entire justification for the car, collapsed. The clients pulled out at the last minute, spooked by rising interest rates. My projected six-figure commission vanished into thin air. I was devastated, not just for the loss of income, but because my primary lie to my wife had just been exposed. I tried to downplay it, to pretend it was a temporary setback, but the numbers in our bank account told a different story. The $1,600 payment, which had been a struggle before, was now a full-blown crisis. We were officially living beyond our means, with no safety net and no relief in sight. Then, the second blow. Our son came down with a nasty respiratory virus that led to a 2-night stay in the hospital. He was fine, thankfully, but after our insurance paid its share, we were left with a stack of bills totaling nearly $5,000. In our previous life, this would have been a painful but manageable expense covered by our emergency fund. But our emergency fund had been bled dry over the past few months, quietly drained to cover the shortfall created by the car. There was no money. The conversation that night was the calm before the storm. How are we going to pay for this? A wife asked, her voice devoid of emotion, her eyes locked on the medical bills spread across the table. I had no answer. For the first time, my bravado, my salesmanship, my confident projections, they all failed me. I was empty. I'll put it on a credit card, I stammered. She just stared at me, her gaze piercing through my pathetic attempt at a solution. With what money will you pay the credit card bill, Mark? With the money from the deal that fell through? The dam of our politeness finally broke. Years of small resentments, of unspoken fears, all centered around that gleaming black monument to my ego in the garage, came pouring out. It was a brutal, honest, and heartbreaking fight. She accused me of gambling with our family's future, of prioritizing my image over our son's security. I, in my shame and desperation, lashed out, accusing her of not believing in me, of not supporting my ambition. It was ugly and unforgivable. I fell behind on the car payment. I told her I had gotten a deferment, another lie in a long chain of them. The truth was, I just didn't send the money. The calls started a few weeks later. Polite at first, then increasingly firm. They were from a restricted number, and I would take them in the backyard, my back to the house, my voice a low, panicked murmur. I was a man living a secret, shameful life. I was juggling credit card debt, taking cash advances to cover household expenses, all while trying to maintain the illusion of the successful broker who drove a $90,000 car. The final blow was the one I delivered myself. My wife, her trust in me completely shattered, started looking into our finances herself. She found the credit card statements with their ballooning balances. She saw the string of missed calls from the finance company. And one afternoon, she found the past due notice from Mercedes-Benz Financial Services that I had carelessly hidden at the bottom of a recycling bin. It was a stark official document demanding immediate payment to avoid repossession. There was no confrontation. There was no yelling. When I came home from work that evening, the house was unnervingly quiet. She and our son were gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter next to my car keys which she had left there. It was short and devastating. I can't live with the stress and the lies anymore. We're staying at my parents'. I need space to think. The man I married would never have put us in this position. I read the note, then sank to the floor, the cold tile a shock to my system. I had done it. My stupid, selfish pride had cost me everything, not just money, but the two people who were my entire world. I walked into the garage and flipped on the light. The car was immaculate, gleaming as if it were still in the showroom. It looked powerful, successful, and completely, utterly empty. It was a hollow shell, and it had turned me into one too. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own quiet, desperate sobs. Rock bottom is a quiet place. For me, it was the echoing silence of a house that was no longer a home. It was the sight of my son's empty room, his toys frozen in place. It was the crushing realization that I was the sole architect of my own desolation. For days, I barely moved, lost in a fog of shame and regret. But eventually, the survival instinct kicks in. You either sink or you start the long, painful swim back to the surface. My first act of surrender was a phone call to Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. I didn't try to negotiate or make excuses. I just told the truth. I couldn't afford the car. I couldn't make the payments. I wanted to know my options. The voice on the other end was professional and dispassionate. He explained the process of a voluntary surrender. It was a formal, sterile term for a deeply personal and humiliating defeat. A few days later, a man from a transport company arrived. He was quiet and efficient. He walked around the car, checked it for damage, and had me sign a form. He didn't make eye contact. I handed him the keys, the same keys that had once felt like a scepter of power, and watched as he expertly loaded my $90,000 mistake onto a flatbed truck. As it drove down my quiet suburban street, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound, gut-wrenching sense of relief, as if a massive physical weight had been lifted from my chest. Getting rid of the car was the first step, but it didn't solve the financial catastrophe. The car was sold at auction for far less than what I owed. I was hit with a deficiency balance of nearly $20,000, a debt for a car I no longer even possessed. It was the most expensive lesson of my life. I stared at the bill, and for the first time in a year, I didn't feel panic. I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the price of my ego. This was the cost of my lesson. It was time to pay it. I dismantled my old life with a ruthless efficiency. I called a real estate agent, a colleague I had once been so desperate to impress, and told him I needed to sell my house. We put it on the market and sold it quickly, using the equity to pay off the deficiency balance, the hospital bills, and the credit card debt I had secretly accrued. I moved into a small, faceless apartment complex across town. I sold my expensive suits, my watches, my entire collection of status symbols. I bought a 10-year-old Toyota Camry with cash. It had cloth seats and a small dent in the fender, and driving it felt more liberating than the Mercedes ever had. It represented honesty. It was paid for. It was mine. My career as a high-flying real estate broker was over. I couldn't maintain the facade anymore. I took a salaried job in property management. The pay was a fraction of what I once made, but it was stable. It was a paycheck I could count on, not a commission I had to chase. My life became small, simple, and predictable. I created a budget on a simple piece of paper, not a complex spreadsheet. I paid my bills. I put a small amount into savings. I was starting from zero. After 3 months of living this new, solitary life, I called my wife. I didn't ask her to come back. I didn't promise her the world. I just told her honestly and humbly what I had done. I told her I sold the house, the car, everything. I told her about my new job, my apartment, and the debt I was slowly paying off. I apologized, not just for the money, but for the lies, for the pressure I had put her under, for not being the partner she deserved. She listened patiently. There was a long silence on the line. "Can I see the apartment?" she asked. She came over the next Saturday. She looked around the small, sparsely furnished space. She saw the handwritten budget taped to the refrigerator. She saw the old, beat-up Camry in the parking lot. She saw a man who was no longer pretending. We sat and talked for hours, more honestly than we had in years. I didn't ask for a second chance, but I asked if I could start trying to earn her trust back. The road back has been long and slow. She and my son moved into a small rental of their own, and for months our relationship consisted of weekend visits and co-parenting. But slowly, painstakingly, we began to rebuild. We went to counseling. We learned to communicate without the toxic static of financial stress and resentment. She saw that my changes weren't temporary, they were real. A few months ago, we decided to try again. We found a small house to rent, a place that fit our new, smaller life. It's not the house we had before, but it feels more like a home. It's built not on the shaky foundation of ambition and image, but on the solid ground of honesty and partnership. I don't think about the Mercedes much anymore. But sometimes, when I see one on the freeway, gleaming and powerful, I feel a small shiver of recognition. It's a reminder of the man I used to be and of the devastating price I paid for his foolish pride. I lost a house, a career, and a fortune. But in the process, I found something I didn't even know I was missing, myself. And that's a trade I'd make every single time. I'd love to know what this made you feel or remember. Have you ever had something like this happen in your life? Drop your experience in the comments below. Let's create a conversation that others can connect to.